So I just want to think quickly about how we communicate through digital media. And some of this will be really obvious to you, so I'm going to go through it really quickly. But firstly, a website. If your church hasn't got a website, then I would encourage you to build a website or to employ somebody to do that for you. There's plenty of companies that will do that for you. But if you want to build your own, here are two very popular website building spaces online, Wix and Squarespace. They are generally quite user-friendly. They might take a little bit of navigation, but there's no coding involved. You can build a website from scratch. My point on that, though, would be to keep it simple. Keep it as simple as possible. Start with the most basic of content, and look at your website as a shop window. I'm reflecting at the minute on how our own church website, well, the insiders, those who have got control of it, who make the decisions about it, are actually those who never look at it. The people that look at your website are outsiders looking in. They want to get a sense very quickly about who you are, what you're about. So make it attractive, but make it as simple as possible and probably as static as possible, because actually that will help you in the maintenance of it. So that's the website. Social media. You may be on one or more platforms. Here are three of the most popular still: Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And we'll talk in a minute about which platform does what. But these are constantly changing and updating websites for you. They are higher maintenance than your website should be, but they are easier to update and maintain. So post and promote events, share links, use it as a community forum for interaction, an active point of contact. You can share public comments and private comments on, and think about what is going out publicly and what is going out just, and what you want to go out just amongst your own community. One we'll all be familiar with, I'm sure, is email. And you may be sending out emails to your church. You may have email groups set up within your own email provider, whether that's Outlook or Mail or something on your computer. But if you haven't already, it might be worth looking at some communication management software like Church Suite or MailChimp. And you may notice when you get an email through, it might have at the bottom who the management software is. And that's just a way of actually monitoring the information that you're sending out, keeping record of it in one central place, having databases for your church, for you as a leader or your leadership team. That's if you're finding emails unmanageable. There's a good management system available. And of course, group messaging apps. And I'm sure many of you will have been using WhatsApp in particular this last year with people in your church, or Messenger, which is a Facebook app, or even just group messages through your SMS text messages on your phone. Those are great ways for encouraging people, keeping up to date with what's happening with people in your small group, what they're praying for, what they need to know about in the immediate, between the weekly catch-ups or whatever it is. Utilize them. So there are just some communication methods that we can use more effectively digitally, and hopefully that's not too much new news for you, but it's worth highlighting. So just again, very briefly, just highlighting some of the most popular social media platforms and also what they do best. Now, again, I'm sure that you'll know many of these, but there are just a few more that I want to highlight as well, in case you aren't aware of them and what they do. So the most popular and widely used by far is Facebook. It's an all-rounder as a platform. It's particularly useful for an adult audience, and therefore many young people aren't on it because their parents are. We need to recognize that if we're trying to reach young people, this is perhaps not the best method. And your youth workers will know that. Instagram, it's a more eye-catching, younger version of Facebook in many ways. It's primarily a photo and video sharing app used amongst young people and young adults, and it's designed. It's worth noting this, it's designed for smartphones, not for computers. So if you went on the website, the Instagram website on your computer, you'll find actually it's very static. It doesn't do very much because they've designed it to simply work on a smartphone. And that's the same for WhatsApp as well, which you might be thinking is not a social media platform, but actually it is in many ways, because you can share much of the same content, but within closed groups. So it might be useful for small groups for sending text, but also images and videos, inspiring content to one another. Again, it's designed for smartphones. Twitter. Do you know what? Twitter is enduringly popular, but I don't understand why, really. It's popular particularly with celebrities and businesses. I think that's possibly why, because, you know, the movers and shakers are using it the most. And it's useful for sharing news and links and comments and public conversation. I apologize if you are a Twitter user, by the way. YouTube, again, you might not consider as a social media platform, but actually you can interact quite well on YouTube if your interest is in video content. You can comment, you can live chat, as we know from our NWBA services. It's a useful way of cataloging films and videos, or for you to save and bookmark them, for sharing them. Vimeo is very similar, not as popular as YouTube, but it's mostly used by creative film types. And that's worth being aware of as well. Right, okay, a few more that we may not be as familiar with. TikTok, increasingly popular, especially amongst young people. And it's useful for sharing viral video content. Or if you want to make a viral video, perhaps you want to use TikTok. But I would advise caution, and there have been security concerns over some of these platforms, TikTok being one of them. And of course, we need to exercise caution and discretion on all of the stuff we're putting out socially, but these are just some things to be aware of. Again, another one, Snapchat. The most active users of Snapchat are 13-year-olds, and they're spending upwards of 30 minutes a day on the app. I mean, I'm surprised that that's so low, actually. Some young people I know are on Snapchat and other social medias more like 8 hours a day. Especially like this last year, and that's no exaggeration. That's how much time young people are spending on in digital spaces. But Snapchat is a haven for user-generated content, people who want to generate their own content and share it quickly. One of the reasons why it should be used with caution is because Snapchat can send something to somebody, and then it can be visible to that person for maybe 30 seconds and then disappear. And that's why we need to just be careful about using it or thinking about using it, because it does have safeguarding concerns with it as well, especially for church leaders. It's good to be aware of, but I wouldn't advise using it. Pinterest, again, you might not consider as a social media platform, but it's most popular for sharing things to do with visual pictures to do with fashion, food, decor, weddings, workouts, DIY related projects. Notably, 81% of Pinterest users are female, and that might lead you to think about, well, how might I use that in a female-specific ministry? If I've got a women's group at church, or an interest group in some kind of design, or if you want to search for something related to church design, to video, to inspiring photo content for inspiring biblical or Christian material, Pinterest might be useful to you. And the last one I'll highlight is Reddit. Does anybody use Reddit? Did I see your hand go up, Phil?
I've used it. I would agree with you. Use with absolute caution.
Yeah.
My son's a YouTuber, and he's basically built a 50,000 following by using Reddit. there are. I mean, I sort of have had a ministry towards individuals through Reddit, but it's very. There's a lot of Americans on it, a lot of American evangelicals. It's a very potentially toxic environment. Yeah, you kind of need to keep your feet on the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I've put caution as advice, but it's worth being aware of what Reddit is. If somebody comes up to you and says, have we thought about, posting something here? And things may change, platforms do evolve and change. So and Reddit is more popular in the US currently, but is increasingly popular here. And it's a rabbit hole. It really is a rabbit hole of communities, of endless conversations, articles and discussions, and probably not that useful for our churches right now. And we have to be aware of that it's not moderated as well as some of our other platforms. So some caution is advised there. Okay, let's think more specifically about streaming platforms, though, and again, what they do best. So I'll cover this ground very quickly. There are two predominant video host sites, which you'll know. Again, Facebook Live, and that's something they've really pushed in the last few years. Facebook. They want you to go live on Facebook and be sharing content in that way. So they've made it as easy as possible. It appears directly on people's news feed. That's a big advantage of it. You may catch some more visitors on this platform than others. And viewers can interact in the comment section, and videos can be easily shared. Again, that shareable aspect of what we're doing is important. But YouTube Live as well. That's what we used the other day for the NWBA service on Easter Sunday, as opposed to uploading and posting YouTube content. YouTube Live is a way of live streaming. It's the most popular video streaming website by far. The advantages are you're also able to stream in 4K or high definitions that you wouldn't be able to do on other platforms, including Facebook and Zoom. And it also works interestingly on most smart TVs. And I don't know how much you've thought about this if you put out YouTube content either live or pre-recorded, but how are people at the other end watching it? Now, the likelihood is that most people will be watching through a tablet or a phone, possibly on a laptop. But if you can watch it on a TV, that actually changes your experience of engaging in a service as well. So how are we encouraging people to watch our content? That might affect how we make it and share it. And the last one that we might know so well is Zoom. I'd be really interesting. Maybe you can comment. Maybe you can comment in the chat here, which of these, if any, you're using for your services at the minute, and why. Just very briefly, a sentence. I know a number of churches chose early on to use Zoom to stream their services, and that's great for being able to see your community around you in one place. That has some great advantages if you're doing things. If you're doing things alongside people. However, if you're presenting at the front, you might have gone down the route as I did, thinking about going on to Facebook Live or YouTube Live and be very presentational in style. Now, the advantage of Zoom is that you've got your community around you, but the advantage of Facebook and YouTube is actually you might be reaching a wider audience because that's not a closed meeting. That's a public space. And that's worth thinking about. But there are also hybrid versions of doing those things. So you might do your service on Zoom, for example, and then you might stream that live to Facebook or YouTube, which you can do actually right within Zoom. You don't need additional software to do that. You can stream it directly to Facebook or YouTube. So just looking at a few of the comments here, Tricia just said, we just do Zoom. That's all we can cope with. Great. If that's what you're doing, fantastic. Start from where you are, and don't get overwhelmed by the choice or the possibilities. Do what you can see in front of you. John and Helen, you're saying that Facebook Live, and you're sharing it via Zoom, so people can watch it together. So you're doing it Facebook Live, and then you're plugging into Zoom from there. Is that right?
Yeah. So what we do is we pre-record everything, and then OBS it out to Facebook Live, so it goes out live, so we get the audience. But then we, with the Zoom screen on, then share the Facebook Live feed back into Zoom, because some people didn't want to do Facebook, so we do it that way. And what we find is one or two people will watch on Facebook and then switch to Zoom at the end, so they can come on and chat. So quite good. And then with the recorded stuff, we put it up to YouTube later. It just saves us not having to pay for something that will stream to two platforms at once.
Yes, absolutely. And that's part of the balance in this as well. It's working out what software can I use for free, which is quite a lot of software, and what might I have to pay a subscription for. But I love that sense of going the opposite way. So you're presenting through something at the front, but actually you're being able to engage with a number of people through Zoom. Might take a bit more of a setup, but just imagine the possibilities in your head. How can I do this? How can I communicate it? How can people share in it? So that's brilliant. I love that. Great. There's so many comments coming in. If I stopped and read them all, then we'd never get on. But please do read in the comments, and I might come up in them later. Phil is saying that we still use PowerPoint for most content creation. Yes, if you don't know already, there's ways of recording your PowerPoint presentation and speaking over them, and that's a great way of creating a video without any additional software, really. Great idea. Okay, I'll move on. There are a few other streaming platforms to be aware of. You might not be using them for your church live stream. One of them is Twitch. Does anybody know of or use Twitch? Oh, Phil again. Phil, you're completely on the pulse here.
It's the only way I can communicate with my son is to watch his shows. Twitch is, again, where the under 25s are, particularly gamers. If you want to get, we could go off on a complete tangent here, but read Anne Morrissey's book on gaming, morality, and society, and realize there's a whole other world there. But yeah, Twitch is where you can have a debate with someone about whether or not it's moral for them to live in the occupied territories while you're trying to also shoot down their little man on Mars or whatever you're playing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And one of my good friends who, when I was at college, he was training to be a youth worker. He's now just he unfortunately moved over to the Anglican Church. He's now a curate. His handle is the Gaming Curate, and he's meeting people online, chatting with them, and he's streaming that whilst he's playing these games. A recent youth work conference I was a part of, they hosted a space for HTB gaming, and they're using that as a direct ministry to reach young people. And you may have people in your congregation, young people, who you may not see because they're gaming, and you're thinking, how on earth are we going to engage these people? Move into their world, or get people who know how to move into their world.
It's a fascinating. I now host some space under MKX Dad. So our Mark has got 50,000 followers. There's now a group of people who want to talk to me about what he was like when he was a kid, and can you get his baby photos out? I've now discovered my daughter is called the Bishop's daughter. Into it. Now, again, nobody mentions God with me, but she is now the Bishop's daughter. This is the world. It's a totally different world.
Oh, amazing. Yeah. We need to just be thinking out of the box here in some ways. Again, just a few other things to mention worth mentioning here. You might want to stream directly into your website. A few advantages here are that you have total control over content. It won't, initially at least, be blocked by some of the problems you might find on Facebook or YouTube if you're putting out some content. I'll talk about that in a minute. You can arrange and keep and catalog videos alongside related resources how you want to, but it does take a bit more infrastructure and setup. It's not as simple and as plug and play as YouTube and Facebook and Zoom. And lastly, I just want to mention very briefly, podcasting. It doesn't quite fit in here, but actually creating podcasts is another way of engaging another audience. So they're often free to make and publish and promote. They're great personal audio media for people listening to sermons, teachings, interviews, conversations, and other content you want to create as a church. I listen to podcasts all the time when I'm on a dog walk or in the car, or even going to bed at night, and I'll just want to catch up on BBC News or an interesting podcast that I follow. So creating content. Here's a question to you. What equipment and video editing software do you use? We haven't really got a slide or time to discuss this very much, but how do you create content? Perhaps you can put in the chat, what software do you use? I mean, I actually use very simple software. 90% of my video editing, when people send me content and stuff, whether it's for the NWBA, whether it's for our church, I use with a mobile app called InShot. And it's really powerful and effective for such a small thing, but it means that I can actually be editing things as I'm walking around the house or out and about. And if I've traveled somewhere, I can edit things along on InShot. And I think that works on both iOS platforms and Android platforms. I also use iMovie because I'm a Mac user. It is very basic, but it does the job. But I can see other people sending things through now. Phil says Microsoft Microsoft Picture Editor, very basic, but it works. Mobile phone camera for filming and microphone. Lightworks for editing. Thank you. That's free. Great. So keep sharing those things. If you're typing away, please do keep sharing them. Engagement as a podcaster is great. Okay, so just touching again, reminding that we might be wanting to create or curate content. That means you may focus solely on creating or curating and uploading it as a finished piece. For example, a pre-recorded service will be doing this, where it's content you're putting out through the week or services, which might involve some of your own content. It might also involve contribution from other churches or other organizations. For example, J. John has produced this last year some great Christmas and Easter resources, getting high quality videos with celebrities talking about their faith, and you could slot that into your service, for example. So that's both creating and curating, I guess. Or others in your congregation might be giving you material. We got into a habit of asking different small groups to lead our prayers. So a number of them would film themselves. I'd piece it together. I'd put that in as a piece whilst we were either pre-recording or live streaming as well. And then you might want to think about connecting others to content. Too many C's here, Phil. You may focus mainly on sharing the content of other creators, such as the NWBA in the materials that we're creating and sending out week by week. And that might form your church service or part of your church service. And as Phil's already touched on, how can we be a resource base to support you, and not just with whole pieces, whole services, but with elements that you could put into the week and sharing it on social media or into your services. Baptists Together equally have been producing quite a lot of good content we can share more widely across our Baptist family. Or you may want to focus on how you start live streaming your service or events or messages. And so here's probably the most basic, simple way of doing it. And again, apologies if this is teaching grandmas to suck eggs. You may know this very well already, but you can, with your phone, go straight onto Facebook Live with your Facebook account, and you can walk around the street filming yourselves while you're talking to camera. It is that simple, because Facebook Live functions as with all the equipment in your hand. So with the camera, with the microphone, with the video editing software, with the presentation software, it's all there in it, and with the platform as well, of course, being on Facebook, or it's all there in your hand, and you can go off and do it straight away. And as I say, Facebook have been pushing it, so they're making it as easy as possible. Just look for the live button, and you can, if you want to practice that, you can practice. Just make sure that you change the setting that says publish only to me rather than make it public, and it will just go to you, and you can practice as much as you want before you actually have to go live to the world. There are loads of YouTube videos on how to do Facebook and YouTube Live. There's endless resources. You'll never get through it all. For every level as well, beginners and advanced. But this second one is YouTube Live. Now, you might find that it's not actually as easy to use as Facebook Live, because from a mobile device, they want you to have so many subscribers before you start going on Facebook Live. But on a laptop, you certainly can do Facebook Live pretty much out of the box with your YouTube account. So that's a very simple, basic live stream setup that if you've got a smartphone, you can do today. But if I was talking about how you might want to set up for live streaming at church, then here is a bit of a flow diagram of what's involved. And if we delve behind the camera to see slightly more a comprehensive list here of how a live stream is set up. So you need to think about how your audio, your microphones that you use at church, how that audio then goes in towards a computer. You then want to think about how your cameras then feed into that same computer and how they're matched up. A hardware encoder, it talks about something that converts that audio and digital video signal into something that is translated into how your computer will understand it to then push it out onto a platform. But as churches sing songs live, or if you want to do a reading at church, then you might want to think about some presentation software. I'll list a few in a few minutes. And then, so as well, alongside presentation software, your computer might be also running some streaming software. So the two examples I've got there, your presentation software, that's Easy Worship, but your streaming software is OBS. And we've got the comment above OBS, it says none. I don't know where that's come from. Tricia, thank you for commenting. That looks terrifying. I appreciate this. As I want to say all the way through this, you start from where you are as a church and you think about the purpose of who the people you're trying to communicate and reach. But I'm just trying to go from as basic as it gets as possible to a bit more advanced. So going from, your person who's presenting the service, leading, preaching at the front, who's got a microphone on, they've got a camera on them, comes into your audio mixer and then into a video mixer, then goes into your computer, and then you're looking at how you push it out onto your platform. And here the example is you're pushing it out onto YouTube Live. Thank you, John. Really important to think about the spec of your equipment as well. And let me offer to you an alternative to this more complicated setup in perhaps the more mobile option. And this is what we were using the other day to stream the NWBA service. We were using, I don't want to promote any particular product or company here, but we were using a system called Switcher Studio. And the big advantage here is that this is all contained within an iPad tablet size device with the extension of your cameras, which work off iPhones. And I say iPhones because unfortunately this system does only work with the iOS platform. So you can't run it through your laptop and you can't run it through things that aren't Apple. so much. But if you are an Apple user, and I know that a lot of people have iPhones, you can run this through an iPhone or an iPad, or an iPod, and then you can bring in other elements as you want to make that more advanced. One big advantage to this system is that it's portable. So you don't have to be stuck to your church building to live stream your event. You could take this outside. And whether, you could also do that with Facebook Live, but you could do it here with Switcher Studio. And the advantage Switcher Studio might give you is that you can add in the presentation software, the text on the screens, your PowerPoints. You might screen share from another device, which actually doesn't have to be an iOS device, helpfully. And that setup looks a bit more like this. So I won't go through all of this in detail. I'm very happy to talk to anybody who wants to know a bit more about this. And John at Penralt and I had a great conversation about getting them set up with Switcher Studio. And as I understand, you're still going with Switcher. Is that right, John? Yeah, brilliant. He's got his thumbs up. The basic setup here, for those who are looking intently at the screen, is that you're running everything from your iPad. You have a few adapters going into your either wireless or wired in network. And then you're using cameras. You're using iPhones as cameras, and you can use up to 9 different sources. So whether they're cameras or whether they're you're sharing a screen from a laptop for, say, song words or something else. And if you look at our Easter Day service, you'll see an example of what it might produce. Great. Just very quickly, I know I'm going over this so quickly, but I appreciate that some of you may be well sorted on this. Others of you are just even beginning to look at it. So I'm trying to move through it quite quickly. If you're looking at some presentation software, you might be using one of these already, or you may have never heard of any of these. But these are all softwares for projecting song words or Bible readings, or if you want to run your videos through some of this software, you can do that. And a number of them are free and actually do an awful lot for free. So one that I've used quite well there, and I used for the Ministers Conference for a few years actually, was OpenLP, the one at the top left. But other ones I've used and would recommend are Easy Worship. It's very comprehensive. There is a cost to using that, either monthly or annually. Pro Presenter is probably the most expensive there, but many of the bigger churches would use that and say it was the best. Proclaim is made by the people who make Logos Bible software. That's good for collaborating with a team throughout a week. Worship Extreme is related to CCLI, people who produce Song Select and all of that. They've made Worship Extreme. That's okay. There are a few there I would not recommend so much either, but I'll leave that for now. So that's presentation software. That's for sharing song words and scriptures alongside your live stream. But this is streaming software. So this is the bit that sends all your video feed and your presentation feeds out onto the internet. And I'm not going to go through these now, but there's a whole number here that you could use and have different advantages. Just to say, for example, that Ecamm works on Macs, vMix works on PCs. So that's why, you need to be aware of some of the limitations of these. One more I'll mention there, though, is Open Broadcaster Software, OBS. A lot of people use this because it's free and it's actually very comprehensive. But as I understand, it's not the most user-friendly of them all. And you might find that another one works better for you. But have a look at those if you're interested. As I say, these slides will be shared with you later, so no need to frantically write everything down. Speaking of writing things down, here's some equipment that you might want to consider, from cameras to the capture card. That translates your camera feed into your computer. Audio, video mixer. Somebody I see in the Daniel, you're talking in the chat box about the Blackmagic Design ATM Mini. That's a little machine for switching between video feeds and presentation software that works incredibly well, I understand, although I haven't had a chance to use it yet. And then you want to think about what computer you're using. As John mentioned above in the chat, you need to think about the spec of your computer. Can it handle everything that I'm throwing at it? And a lot of this equipment is getting cheaper by the year, but you do need to think about the speed and spec of your computer and what you're using it for. And then it's worth thinking about some accessories. And I would say that there are 3 things that can really up your game in improving your video making or live streaming. And the first is to think about what camera are you using. And phones are very good, but if you want to upgrade, you might want to think about using a DSLR, which might have a much nicer lens and give you a much nicer picture. But phones do an awful lot. They're great. The cameras in phones are brilliant. If you can't upgrade your camera, at least think about stabilization. What is your camera on? If nothing else, get it up near your head height. Don't put it down on your desk. Put it up near your head. Balance it on some books if you've got nothing else. Or consider just getting a phone mount or a tripod. And that will make a huge difference to your presentation. Another thing that will up your game is improving your audio. So the audio microphone in your phone or your camera is probably not very good. And for not much money, you could buy a plug-in microphone, either a tie-clip microphone or a dynamic or condenser type microphone that will just dramatically improve your audio quality and bring it closer to your mouth very simply. And that, of course, goes from simple to the extreme of very complicated. And then the last thing is worth thinking about is lighting. Now, this could be simply replacing the lamp in your room or a couple of lamps in your room, having light that comes from the window onto your face. I'm in an office here, and actually not ideally located because the window is more or less behind me, although it's not behind, it's not visible, but it's not shining light directly on my face. So I have a simple desk lamp attached here. I can't quite get it in shot. And I can move that around, and that just gives me the ability to change my lighting as I want to, and that can make a big difference on your stream. So 3 things that can up your game quite relatively easily: camera, or at least thinking about stabilization and where you put your camera, the audio quality, and the lighting. All of that moves from very simple to very complex. Okay, right. Lastly, want to just think about a few copyright considerations. Now, you might be really hot on this, or you may never have considered it, but here are a few important questions to ask about the content that you're using, especially if you're a curator of content. Has somebody else made it? Well, that's hopefully easy to answer. One that's not so easy to answer is who might own it? And that might not simply be the person who made it. It might be a record label if it's music. It might be a video production company if it's video. And therefore, who has the rights to it? And do they or the content creator deserve rights, recognition, or royalties for that? And so it's really important to ask this question: do you have permission to use it? If not, you could come up against some problems. And finally, what is the purpose of you reproducing that piece of work? Are you just looking for a filler in your service? Are you looking to put in something that you haven't got? Where could you find that legitimately? And where are you ripping that off the internet not helpfully? So a few important copyright considerations, and this is a bit of a minefield. It seems there are some grey areas, but some important things you really should consider if you're putting stuff out online or producing stuff in person in your church as well. Hybrid model, online model, live model, it doesn't matter. If you're playing songs, producing music, playing background music or video, then you really should have a CCLI license. And it covers a whole multitude of sins. If we didn't have CCLI, it'd be incredibly hard to pull any permissions together that we have through these licensing. So if you're doing things online, really important to be aware that they have a streaming plus license. So it's worth going on their website and seeing what they cover, what they do. But you may also need to consider these few basic licenses as well. A church copyright license if you're projecting words, a church video license if you're playing some film scenes for an illustration for your sermon perhaps, and there's a whole list if you go in depth onto the website of what film clips are covered. A PPL license if you want to play background music. And this is something to think about, particularly if you're streaming your live service directly to your website. So if you're not using YouTube or Facebook, then you might need to get a PRS LOML license. If you're using images, and this is important because the Baptist Union put out an email a few months ago to say there have been some people brought up on the fact that they're using copyrighted images on their church services and their live streams, and we can get in trouble for that. So if you're looking for images, make sure that you have permission to use them. And here are the two websites you could go to that offer high quality free photos to use in your presentations. And you may know of others. If you know of others, put them in the chat. That'd be great. Pixabay, Unsplash. Those two are the websites that I use probably the most. And finally, it's worth pointing out that YouTube and Facebook have their own copyright policies. So actually, if you are streaming to YouTube or Facebook, you don't need a PRS online music license. But you do need to be aware that Facebook and YouTube have their own copyright policies, and therefore you may have found that you've been blocked. If you're putting out a video and you're using somebody else's content, you've either had your live stream blocked or your video blocked, or there's been a flag on your video to say you cannot monetize off this content, which I don't think is what most of us are looking to do anyway, but you just need to be aware of there. Great, thank you, John, for a quick note on there. It's still our responsibility to make sure that the photos on Pixabay, etc., are themselves copyright, not illegal copies. Yeah, absolutely. But they are websites that a lot of content creators will want to put their content on there to be used, and it's useful, as you may see in my presentation, that we credit them, and we do in our NWBA service as well. So last thing, a few helpful sites that you might find useful. And if you know of others, put them in the chat box, please. But of course, the NWBA website is a great wealth of resources. And as we've talked about, hopefully that will become a resource base for people to use and to share content with us across our Baptist family. Brilliant. If you're looking for some sermon illustrations or for some intro videos, go Chatter. Collect a lot of them into one place, and so many of them are free to use, and they include videos from the Bible Society and other places, and some of them you'll have to pay for, but lots of good stuff up there. There are a number of different websites that do this thing, but we use Motion Worship occasionally to download some backgrounds for some lyric videos we're making, or for the countdowns that we use before our services go out. They also have some mini movies as well. It's an American website. It does seem a bit American, but the visuals are high quality. If you're looking for music or worship material, we are trying to make some of our own stuff more readily available across the NWBA, but it's also being aware of a few places you might want to go. And the Wren Collective, if you don't know, on their website, have produced some videos specifically for churches to use in their streams. Martin Smith has done the same, although you have to pay for some of his. I'm really surprised that more Christian musicians haven't done this because it's a great way of promoting their work and their music, but still a limited number have. Resound Worship has been mentioned as well as a resource to go to. You'll have to pay for a lot of their material, but a lot of good songs that you'll have heard through our own services there. And a lot of the same people who work with Resound also produce stuff for Engage Worship, and that's full of great service ideas and content that we can use. And I've said finally 3 times, but this really is the final one. Be creative. Just to really reiterate some of the questions that have already been asked today. What can you now do with the tools that are available to us, perhaps weren't available to us 2, 3, 5 years ago? What could your church communication and gospel presentations look like with these new tools and resources to us? And finally, is this the time for your young people to shine? Really want to encourage you to really think about how you can get your young people involved in a way they've not been involved before. And that's the last thing I want to say on that. So I don't know, Phil, if you want to what you want to do at this time.
Thanks, Johnny.
I'll leave it over to you.
Yeah, I'm imagining that some of you by now are wishing you hadn't come, because you're probably just feeling completely overwhelmed with everything we've said. And what I want to do is just ask you, please don't panic. I want to take you back to the slide that I showed you at the beginning or in the first session that we did together this morning. And I just want to remind you of that image of the disruptive technologies. And just bear with me a second while I put that on screen. Hopefully you can see it now. Yeah. And if you're feeling bamboozled, then what we've done is we've proved that this graph is correct, because what we are is in this space here. Most of us, I suspect, are feeling, my goodness me, there's all this kit, there's all this stuff out there. Where on earth do I begin? But what you've probably, I hope, also heard is you have friends who know. Jonny himself has, if you weren't baffled by some of what Jonny put on the screen today, we might have to get rid of him, because that's the point. He's here to help. I know that Dan, who again has a lot of experience in this area, is already sort of talking to me privately about the fact that the skills are out there. A lot of what we've done in NWBA is basically because my brother both worked for BT in heading up their video conferencing arm in the days when that was something that was mystical. And also now works pretty much full-time at Altrincham in actually getting all the permissions and managing and producing a lot of their material. So there are people within our NWBA community who understand this stuff. The second thing I would want to say is this. This journey began for me in Marks and Spencer's Cafe in Aintree 4 years ago. And at the time, my daughter Emma was 8 years of age, and I was tired. We were doing her Christmas shopping, and we went to the Marks and Spencer's Cafe so I could sit down because I'm old. And she just bought for her brother and sister and aunties a whole set of Star Wars character bubble baths. And she pulled out my iPhone because she was bored. And she started to film these characters, and she kept making me do voiceovers. And within the space of that 15 minutes in Marks and Spencer's Cafe, she had made a 5-minute video of Star Wars with a set of bubble baths from Marks and Sparks. And I realized at that point that there is a generation for whom this is second nature. I wish I'd looked the video out, but then I'd probably had copyright issues. Did any of you ever see the episode of Downton Abbey when they got the phone fitted? And Carson announced to everybody that if the phone rang, he must be sent for and he would deal with the crisis when it rang. That's probably how many of us are feeling right now. And we laughed when we watched that episode of Downton Abbey. And I dare say that somebody will be watching this in 100 years' time, laughing at us, that we even thought we needed to run a seminar on how to answer the phone. So I think what I would want to say is, even if you are completely baffled by everything that's been said today, let me bring you back to this graph and say, as church leaders, where do we want to be? Are we going to stay with the blue line and say, do you know, I'm sorry, but we're just going to be a church that stays behind? Or are we going to say, okay, we recognize that this is very, very mysterious territory, but we're committed to try and explore it. And it's not a matter of understanding it all. It's a matter of saying, yes, we're going to live in that space because our young people will show us the way through it. Because there are people like Jonny and Dan and Tim and others who can help us get through it. But remember the other slide that I showed you too, or the other title. What the clever people are saying is, this is leading us to an imagination economy. And what they mean by that is that actually more and more and more, it will not be the people who have the technology that lead the way, because everyone will have the technology. It will be the people with the imagination for how the technology can be used. And I would encourage you to go away today, if you are completely baffled by everything Jonny has just said, go away saying, yes, but we know we can find someone who can tell us. What we cannot do for you is imagine what it might be for your church, because that is what you know. And my dream for our future is you do the imagining. You look at your situation and say, we will imagine what is right for us, which is going to be different for every one of our churches. And then let's talk to each other. Because as Jonny said, if you were a little bit bamboozled by what Jonny said about microphones, just go to Google and type in how to improve the sound on my videos. And you will be immediately presented with 10 YouTube videos that will explain it. For you, it might be as simple as buying a £50 piece of kit to plug into the bottom of your smartphone that will massively improve. And literally, it is a matter of just plugging it in. What I would encourage you to take away from today is the commitment to begin to imagine, to recognize that we're no longer in a world where there's no point imagining because we'll be dead before the technology has caught up with us. We're now in a world where the technology is already there. The only thing that is holding the technology back is our imagination. We can either leave the church on the blue line, or we can very carefully begin to take our steps into this area. And I hope that we can build a network of support and expertise that can help us. And again, thinking about investment, some of us might be horrified at the thought of spending £400 on a camera, but how many of our churches in the past have spent twice that on hymn books that are now sitting gathering dust in a cupboard? We need to change our mindset. How much money did the Baptist community spend in preserving pipe organs in the last century? It will be considerably less than it would cost us to turn every one of our considerably more than it would cost to turn every one of our churches into a digital streaming studio. You as leaders, even if you don't understand a word that Jonny's been saying, as leaders can play that part in recognizing this is the future. And we need to be a church that can inhabit that future.